Hello, everyone, especially those in the Isle of Man, because this video is going to be a dissection of one of your advisors who flies over from Denmark, and his name is David Quirk. I do find it really amazing how one little island can have such bad advice, some such people, and I will be dissecting what he says in this radio interview because honestly, it's ridiculous. And I'm not going to resort to high science or anything here. His background is geology, and there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. He's just as qualified as anyone else to speak on the subject. Although, of course, on the Manning line, when I was on, I was criticised for not being this and not being that. But certainly, as far as I'm concerned, his geology background is just as good as any other background. But it doesn't matter about backgrounds. What matters is evidence of what you say. And I just find it amazing how otherwise intelligent people can say such things and mislead. So I'm going to try and explain it in simple terms without getting too technical. And we'll listen to what he has to say and I'll dissect it as we go.
Video today, we're looking at where we get to with net zero. In fact, is net zero still the correct terminology for where we're trying to get to? Is decarbonisation the real thing? The island's committed to cutting its emissions from about 700,000 tonnes now to zero within 30 years to get carbon neutral electricity into our power grid. And, well, will it work? I've got a man who knows. So it's Faster Mike. Good afternoon. Dave Quirk. Hi, Dave.
Faster Mike. Hi.
Well, you are... Now, hang on a minute. Which terminology do I use? Are you Energy Transition Advisor at the Danish Offshore Technology Centre, Research Director of the Max Geological Survey, or Chairman of the Energy and Sustainability Centre?
Well, I'm all three, but yes, my salary comes from Denmark's Technical University, so DTU. Yeah.
Okay, let's get to the phones then. Let's see who's on first. It's Julian. Julian, hi. You're live with Dave Quirk. Hi, Julian.
Hi, Andy, and hello, David.
Hi, Julian. How you doing?
All right, thanks. Just interested to know your opinion on the annual energy yield models that's been published by the MUA and Wardell Armstrong, which appear to show that Caervai wind farm at Erie Stain would produce 3 times more power than neighbouring comparable onshore wind farms and double the offshore wind farms like Walney Wind Farm off Barrow Furnace. Just wonder, what is so special about Erie Stain that the yield seemed to be 3 times, 300% more?
To recap here, the Isle of Man's advisors have advised yields on land yields at the one location with 20 megawatts of wind turbines. That's 5 wind turbines, about 4 each. Yields of 74%, what we call a load factor, and I've covered that so many times. Let me give you some background to that. The UK government reckons Scotland onshore is 27.8%, Ireland 27%, and offshore you get much higher yields, and on average more like, well, the higher yields are 40%. So the offshore wind farm you can see from the Isle of Man towards the UK, that one gets 40%. But no, in the Isle of Man you're reckoning on to 78%. The world record for a load factor, although it's now being destroyed, is high wind. That's the floating wind farm where you can anchor well out in higher winds in the ocean, and they did that off Scotland on high wind, and they got a record. It was over 5 years of 54%. Oh, no. Isle of Man on land is going to even beat that by almost 50%. It's not possible. And by the way, the high wind, of course, failed. And at the moment is 0% because it had to be towed away for major work. And it's been out of action for the last 8 or 9 months. So you somehow magically in the Isle of Man are going to get this figure. It is totally absurd. And the fact I've raised this and no one wants to discuss it, and I'll happily take part, let's do a Zoom debate with anyone you wish. You know, it's not possible. But that's why Julian here has asked this basic question. Now, don't forget, we're talking about 74% claim, and that's what you based your costs on, while missing out a lot of other costs, because what you're proposing in the Isle of Man is going to cost you lot a fortune, as well as destroying a lot of your environment and nature.
Yeah, it is a very windy site, and it's worth going to the Global Wind Atlas, which DTU produce, and it's showing a load capacity factor, which means how much of the maximum you could produce on average. So if you've got a 20 megawatt wind farm in Erie Stain area, you'd probably produce about 10 megawatts on average, slightly more actually. It's about 55%, so it's really high. It's world class.
Now, what's to note here is that it's really high at 55%. That is still well below the 74%, by the way. So the 74%, which you've been told the costs are based on, by the way, that's out the window. But 55% is more than the world record. And it's more than the world record for even offshore balanced. And what's it based on? It's not based on real data, because the only real data you've got in the Isle of Man is from September to March over one winter, and even that didn't give 55%. So this is based on a world atlas produced by his concerns, that what he's been involved in. Oh, and you just look up the wind atlas and you get it. No, it's not like that. You have to measure it. And this is so absurd. This is, frankly, a beginner wouldn't be making such a silly statement as that. And no one in the wind farm industry would do that or invest in a wind farm without actually measuring the wind in the location properly. And that means for a few seasons.
Right. When you talk about global, I've had a look at because you're in Denmark, aren't you, at DTU?
Yeah.
I've looked at the 13 largest offshore wind farms, which are usually far more productive. And if you take their 13 years and you take the average capacity factor, that works out at 35%. And that's for yours are well offshore. How does the Isle of Man onshore get up to between 60 and 85%? Because that's more than double your offshore ones.
Well, it's a funnel effect, actually. It's high, of course, and now modern offshore wind farms are producing. It depends where you are, of course. If you're in the Baltic, it's about 35%. Now offshore Denmark, it's about 50%. It depends on the height of the wind turbines.
That is a totally untrue statement. I'm not trying to show you too many figures here, but just let's look at what offshore wind, which is much higher yields than onshore. Let's see what offshore gets in Denmark to challenge what he's just said. And here's the table. Keep in mind that the world record claimed by Highwind, a world record, was 54% over 5 years. So let's go down the column there for the latest short term. That's the 18 months capacity factors. And capacity factor for wind farms the same as load factor. And as you go down, you'll see them 47%, 38%, 26%, and so on. But the average at the bottom there is 40.8%. And the life capacity factor, that's over a long term, they reckon, is 41.7%. And what do we get in the UK on average what do we take the offshore wind farm capacity factors? We take them as 40%. And that's what you get from the Isle of Man. If you look at the Isle of Man and you look out to the sea, at one part you can see the wind farm there, it gets 40%. So you can roughly say offshore 40%, onshore up to 30%. That is typical. So where he's getting his 55% from amazes me. It's fairyland, yellow brick road stuff.
It's just onshore the Isle of Man is actually slightly better than offshore Denmark, and it's worth going to the global atlas. You'll see where the reds and the greens are in terms of high production.
So there you are, depending on his own global atlas, this magic global atlas that can tell you exactly how much wind energy you're going to get up and what you're going to get out of it at your location in the Isle of Man. That's absurd. Nobody in the wind industry does that. This is childish nonsense.
Just to finish, I noticed that the UK government, amongst other governments, use a derating factor where the calculation takes into account things like balancing with the wind going on and off for intermittency, and that is 0.43 times whatever the net output of the turbines are, I suppose, at the terminals. Has that 0.43 calculation been applied to the Isle of Man calculations? Because if you apply 0.43 to their 60 to 85%, it all comes normal and starts to look like the onshore wind farms in Wales and Ireland and Scotland. Has that been done?
Yeah, it's a very good point, actually. There's 2 points. One is it's not a large wind farm that's being proposed. So actually, it never really gets above the base load, the sort of the constant that the Isle of Man needs. So you're never going to have to switch it off as such, which is the curtailment.
Well, that very first point is quite correct, because actually you're going to get about, on average, around about 5 megawatts out of it. He's claiming 10 or 11, but that's ridiculous. But even at 10 or 11, your overnight minimum is around about 25 megawatts. So you're always going to be able to use what it produces. But the problem with that is you've got to keep your gas running and using about 50% of its fuel, just stay in standby, ready to take up the slack. So for a tiny amount of energy, about 1/5 of your overnight minimum, or about 1/8 or 1/9 of your daytime energy, you're actually sacrificing an awful lot and increasing the costs enormously. So, but he's quite correct. You're never going to ever exceed. The demand's always going to theoretically be there at a great cost, because of the fact is you need the full 100% gas backup.
Yeah, but if you were going to gear up, which the Isle of Man could be self-sufficient in renewable energy, then you need storage. And we're used to storing food. You put your potatoes in the dark, and you make blackberry jam, and you freeze your runner beans. So what you need to do is store surplus energy, and there are various ways of doing that. The Isle of Man has various options. So that's where you avoid having to curtail. You store it and then you use it when you need it.
Well, that's an extremely silly point about storing vegetables and food. The fact is, there is no viable storage system for the Isle of Man, or anywhere else for that matter. The only backup available, the only one, is gas. And as soon as you look at the quantities of all these alternatives, they fall down immediately. I've spent time on that in videos. So now we're going into the world of the yellow brick road, and it'll go further along it now soon.
If that's the case, at the moment, the measurements that I think your models are working on have only been running about 6 months, whereas it's customary 5 to 6 years. Because I think Scotland, even Borrowdale, had 19% in 1 year and 34% in another year. So do you not think it's being a little bit over-optimistic?
It's certainly variable, yeah. Climate change will make a difference as well, although we haven't seen an effect with the wind yet. Of course, I haven't done the modelling that you're talking about. We're working on simulations for the whole energy system in the Isle of Man, not a specific site.
But this discussion is about the wind farm with the 5 turbines. It is not about the overall thing, so that is just ducking the question. As regards him working on the system for the whole of the Isle of Man, I'm going to tell you now, it's the most extreme and silly thing I've ever heard of in my career. But we'll come to it.
But yes, there is variability in there, but again, storage is one way around that.
Like, what storage are you talking about, by the way?
Well, there's various. I mean, Faroes are tending to use batteries, as is, islands like the Azores.
Well, let me tell you for a start, there aren't any viable storage options at all. They don't exist. He mentioned batteries. In the UK, we've just installed a silly battery farm, if you like, a battery facility, 198 megawatt hours. Yeah, and it can output at 98 megawatts at a time, so it can last 2 hours at that rate. Now, if you take the total requirements of the Isle of Man, that would run your system when the wind drops for 2 to 5 hours, depending on what time of day. That's all you're going to get. And this is so silly, and that's a cost of 75 million, by the way. Now, you could have days, in fact, you had 9 days in 2018, and that would cost you, do you know what it would cost you in batteries? Around about £3.7 billion. They're totally unrealistic, literally off the planet as regards costs. So that is absurd. But this man is just away in the clouds on this sort of thing.
But in Norway, Scandinavia, it's tending where there's mountains, it tends to be pumped hydro storage. There's compressed air. There's thermal storage is the main thing in Denmark. Hot water is a great way of utilizing excess energy, and really heating is the key thing.
He says something. He's talking about sand batteries, where you have a silo. You know these big corn silos, these silos farms have, huge things. You'd need one of those for a couple of houses. And what you do is you store the heat in there, in sand basically, and you can get it in slowly and you can take it out slowly. And it's good for hot water. You can't produce electricity out of it because the efficiency loss is so extreme. So these things are not backup for power at all. But again, just cloud cuckoo land. Absolute cloud cuckoo land, naming, oh, we do this, we do that. And when you look at what he's saying they do in those countries, it's absurd. I've done many a video on this.
Even in the Isle of Man.
Yeah. I mean, looking, say, at Pillswood, which is the most recent implementation of battery storage, they're looking at £75 million for a couple of hours, 2.5 hours of storage. What sort of cost do you think we'd need to spend on the Isle of Man if we had, say...
It depends how much batteries. You don't want to overdo the batteries because they are expensive. You're typically looking for an hour or 2 hours of storage, which might be 20 million.
And this only occurs, of course, when you've got more wind on power on the Isle of Man. The idea is that you only need an hour or two at 20 million, or another 20 million for an hour or two. So if the wind's blowing below 12 miles an hour for the day, that's 24 hours. What do you do for the rest of the time? Have no power? This is ridiculous. Backup is not for an hour or two. Backup has to be for, let's take the 2018 example you had, 9 days. And so, and the wind can be too high, and they have to switch off because they can't go up past a certain speed of wind. And so, again, if there's too much wind, they switch off, and you haven't got the power, and you have to use a battery. But apparently, only an hour or two. This, again, is yellow brick road stuff. It's just nonsense.
In the Isle of Man, and you would probably then, with the Isle of Man with its topography and water, you'd probably be looking at pumped hydro storage. But the main way of doing that is underground nowadays, so you wouldn't actually see a reservoir.
So now we have him, and by the way, I've been involved with pumped storage. Now we have him, you're going to build a huge cavern underground. Yeah, and you're going to pump water up. Well, you need quite a lot of water. Now, let me give you something. To Norwich, which I was involved in, the biggest pump storage in Europe at the time in North Wales, that produces 9.1 gigawatt hours. Quite a lot. It has to put 12 in, mind you, but it gets 9.1 out, and pumps a whole lake, basically, a lot of a lake up a mountain and lets it go down again. You'd have to pump up from the sea. You haven't got that sort of water. But the point is here. The Norwich is not for load balancing, except in a very short term. It's perfect for when you have a football match or Coronation Street break and everyone rushes to make a cup of tea. Perfect for little things like that. But it only lasts for very short minutes in terms of balancing. It is not to back up intermittent energy. It's like a capacitor in an electrical system, for those who know about electrical systems. It is not backup storage. I've done a whole video on it. In fact, I'll post the video below in the description on pumped storage for you. I've just done a recent one to explain the figures here. These people haven't a clue what they're talking about, and they're coming here to advise you. Incredible.
Right. And what would be the cost of pumped hydro storage, do you think?
It's a lot less. It works out. I've got some numbers here. It's about a penny a kilowatt hour, actually. It's really quite low. It's surprising.
Than the land usage. I mean, I know Solby Reservoir is 1% of our electrical need.
It's 1.3p per kilowatt hour. If the cost, they're tending to be an 80-year investment, but that's bearing the cost over 15 to 20 years.
That is an absurd costing, totally absurd. And I would challenge him. Why don't we have him debate me about these points in a Zoom thing, if you like? We could get on Zoom and publish it in the Isle of Man. Why doesn't your government expose itself to my arguments? Why can't I have discussions with the people like this who claim to advise you? because those costs are pie in the sky. Don't forget the storage is saying a 1.5p is anyway in addition to the costs, because storage costs more. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. And because it doesn't work anyway, it doesn't store the energy for you for other than a very short time at enormous costs. Well, words fail me. I've never known such bad advice to be given to anybody as this man is giving you.
What sort of land usage would you be needing for that, by the way?
Well, if you're doing it underground, none.
Okay, final word, Julian.
Just be interested. I'm not quite satisfied as to how Erie Stain is being sort of touted at 3 times more than our neighbours. I'd just be very interested if it's just a cherry picking of a few winter months. I mean, you can do that with any wind farm, but if you take it out over a year, if we've got, say, 2 or 3 weeks of no wind whatsoever, which we quite often have in the middle of Wales, that would make a very different complexion on what the
Okay,
yield
all right.
would be.
Julian, we'll leave it there because your signal's blowing here, there and everywhere. It's like it's in a wind farm. So, Dave Quirk, why is Erie Stain world-class?
There's a tunnel effect. The Irish Sea as a whole is very windy, and so it's funneled into the Erie Stain area. It's facing the right direction.
But the funnel effect of the Irish Sea he talks about only gives 40% to the offshore wind farm that you can see from the Isle of Man. That's number one. Number two, if you think of valleys funneling, don't think that way. No one does that because wind blows from different directions. You've got to pick her up from every direction with a wind farm. This, again, is yellow brick road childish nonsense that's being fed out to you. It's unbelievable. I just can't believe you're getting this advice.
And they talk to them and see what the concerns are. And again, if you're getting benefit out of that, a cheaper electricity would be one example. Then actually, and there's sort of a pride in that. You're seeing Denmark heading towards being a clean nation. In fact, they started the wind industry off, funnily enough.
Hence Ørsted.
Yes, he's right. Denmark did lead. And look at the trouble they're in. First of all, they have some of the most expensive electricity in the world to you, the consumer. And here is one report. Intel Store, a renewable energy market research and consulting firm, has uncovered that from 1978 through 2020, Denmark has seen a total loss of 7.8 terawatt hours of wind energy production through a combination of curtailments, faults and failures, as well as age-related asset performance degradation. Denmark's underperforming and curtailed wind turbines. And there's more than that. Let me do more.
Energy prices in Denmark and in all of Europe are going through the roof. I got this month a bill that it's more than double what I paid for the same amount of usage just last year. And these increases are decimating household finances, and the government here in Denmark is making package after package to support. In the meantime, people are freaking out so much that energy companies are shutting down their phone lines, and 4 out of the top 5 apps on the App Store are all energy and electricity related.
So I think the worst place you can probably the worst place you can take advice from at the moment is Denmark.
Yes, although they used to be an oil and gas company, funnily enough. It was the second oil crisis. It's a little like the crisis we had with gas. Denmark didn't want to be beholden to oil and gas anymore.
Right. So does it have any natural resources?
It does. It has wind. Denmark, yes, it's wind. Yes, it's got a lot of oil and gas,
right.
Funnily enough. And in fact, they started investing in wind just as the major oil and gas fields were being developed. And it's having a variety of sources. Having alternatives is a key thing now.
Security.
It's security. It also means you're not beholden to one price. Jersey's got a problem because they depend on nuclear power from France, and the price of that is going up. You want to have alternatives, essentially.
How much is electricity per kilowatt hour in Denmark?
In Denmark, well, it depends where you are. It's a market system, but it's slightly less. I mean, Bornholm is an island the same size as the Isle of Man, and again, you can play the game well if you have your own storage. But I've just got the numbers here. Bornholm, it's 22p a kilowatt hour, so a little less.
Some very nice cherry picking here. You know, Denmark's always been noted for having the highest electricity prices in the world. And by the way, this idea of different sources, wind cannot exist without the backup of gas, because for every megawatt of wind you have, you need a megawatt of gas to back it up for when the wind's not blowing. And there's no storage alternative that's viable.
Okay, so we're paying roughly 29p per kilowatt.
28
to,
or 29,
20.
So let's look at the July 2024 prices for kilowatt hour in Denmark. And here it is here. Well, you're being told all these wonderful things, but these are the actual current July 2024 prices in Denmark. Now, the average was 58.7 euro cents per kilowatt hour. That's 49 pence per kilowatt hour. You're paying apparently about 29. And in the higher band, if you use a bit more, then you're paying 59. So between 49 and 59 pence, say an average of about 55 pence per kilowatt hour. It's not the utopia that's being painted to you, is it? So there we are. I'll wrap it up there. But what I want to appeal to the Isle of Man people most of all is this. I have raised major questions about what you're doing and the path you're going on. And instead of a proper debate, instead of the government saying, OK, let's look at the evidence, Paul, let's examine it just to see if we're right. Oh, no. They just stonewall and carry on without regard for you, the customer, for your costs and the future of your island. I find that remarkable. I also find it disgusting, to be honest. Thank you for watching.